All right, ready for another deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at TLR signaling pathways.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, specifically, we're going to focus on MyD88 and TRIF. These are essential parts of your immune system.
Oh yeah, these pathways are your body's front line, like the first defense against all those nasty pathogens.
Right. Yeah.
And it's incredible they're like this intricate communication system, right? They trigger really specific responses to fight off infections.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. So TLRs, toll-like receptors, they're these pattern recognition receptors, basically.
Right.
Sitting on our cells, they're like guards, constantly scanning for anything suspicious.
Exactly.
Like a bacteria's flagellin protein.
Yeah, they see that and it's like, alarm bells, we got a problem.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But so they sound the alarm, but they don't actually activate the immune response directly, right?
Yeah, that's the interesting part. They need these adapter proteins like MyD88 and TRIF to kind of pass the message along and kickstart the whole defense process.
So it's kind of like TLRs are the watchtowers spotting the enemy, but they need to like send a runner to actually get the troops moving.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, good.
So you can think of MyD88 as like the most common messenger, involved in most of the TLR signaling pathways. It's like the general alarm that sets off a chain reaction.
Okay, and what does that chain reaction look like, that cascade?
So MyD88, it recruits a whole bunch of other signaling molecules.
Right.
And this ultimately leads to the activation of NFB.
NFP, right.
Yeah, and that's a master regulator. It's the one that flips the switch to start producing those pro-inflammatory cytokines.
Okay, so those are like the first responders, right? Things like TNF-alpha and IL-6.
Exactly.
Now, those cytokines, they're the ones that cause inflammation, right? Like all the redness, the swelling, pain.
Absolutely, yeah. They're crucial for fighting infection, though.
Oh, yeah.
They recruit immune cells to the battleground, increase blood flow to the area, basically create an environment that's super hostile to those pathogens.
So MyD88 is like the all hands on deck. We need to get this like immediate response.
Right. TRIF is a little different. It's a more specialized, like a special ops team, deployed for very specific missions, usually against viruses.
Okay, interesting. So how does TRIF differ from MyD88 and how it handles things?
Well, instead of activating NFP, TRIF activates a different pathway.
Right.
And this leads to the production of interferon.
Interferons, oh yeah.
Yeah, the antiviral heavy hitters.
Yeah, they basically stop those viruses from replicating and spreading.
Exactly, yeah. They interfere with that whole replication process. They warn nearby cells about the threat, and they boost the immune response overall.
So we got this critical fork in the road with TLR signaling.
Right.
MyD88 leading to that rapid inflammatory response.
Yeah.
And TRIF specializing in that antiviral warfare.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
But it's not always so black and white. Sometimes there's overlap, synergy between the pathways.
So they work together sometimes, like a coordinated attack.
Absolutely. Some TLRs can activate both MyD88 and TOF, leading to a double whammy.
Right.
Both pro-inflammatory cytokines and interferons get produced.
A much more powerful response.
Yeah.
But I imagine there needs to be a balance, right? You don't want too much inflammation.
You're absolutely right. Too much inflammation, it's like friendly fire. You can actually damage the body's own tissues.
Yeah.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems, like autoimmune diseases.
So how does the body make sure things don't get out of control, regulate these pathways?
Well, there are a few different mechanisms. It's like a system of checks and balances,
Mm-hmm.
For example, there are negative feedback loops that dampen the signaling.
Yeah.
Once the threat's under control, things calm down.
Right.
And there are also special proteins that can inhibit specific parts of the pathways, acting like brakes to prevent things from going too far.
So it's all about that balance, right?
Yeah.
Making sure the immune system is strong enough to do its job,
Yes.
but not so strong that it turns against us.
Exactly. It's an amazing system, really.
It is. And thankfully, scientists are using all kinds of techniques to study these pathways in even more detail, which could lead to some really amazing new therapies.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very exciting field.
I'm curious about that. What kind of techniques are we talking about here?
Well, one technique is called Western blotting.
All right.
And that lets researchers track the activation of specific proteins in the pathways. It's like looking for a protein signature to see if it's been switched on.
Oh, wow. So they can actually see how these signaling cascades are unfolding in a way.
Yeah, in a way. They can also use gene expression analysis, which measures the production of cytokines and other immune molecules, gives them a snapshot of the pathway's activity level.
So by studying these pathways, we're not just gaining knowledge, we're potentially unlocking new ways to treat diseases.
Exactly. That's the ultimate goal.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
This is mind-blowing stuff. We've already learned so much about TLRs, MyD88, TRF, and how they orchestrate our immune response. But I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more to discover. The deeper we dive into these pathways, the more we're going to uncover about how our bodies defend themselves.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Back again, ready to dive deeper into these TLR pathways.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's amazing to think about all this microscopic stuff happening inside of us, all the time, just orchestrating our defenses against, like, these invisible enemies.
We've already talked about how TLRs are like those sentinels detecting the pathogens, and then MyD88, TRF, they're the key messengers
Right.
relaying the signal. But let's zoom in even closer, explore the specific steps involved in these pathways.
I'm all for getting up close and personal with these molecular players. So, like, after MyD88 binds to an activated TLR, what happens next? How does that signal actually get to the nucleus?
Right, where the action is. Well, think of it like a chain reaction, a very carefully choreographed molecular dance.
Okay, I like that.
So when MyD88 docks onto the TLR, it recruits another protein called IRA-CoV4.
IRAC-V4. Is that another one of those kinases?
Hmm.
The ones that add phosphate groups to proteins, like
Yep.
flipping a molecular switch.
You got it. And IRAC4 is key here because it phosphorylates itself and then other IRAC molecules, which sets off this cascade,
Okay.
ultimately activating another kinase called TRAvis6.
Okay, so we're building this chain of kinases,
Right.
each one activating the next, like a molecular relay race.
Exactly. And this relay finally leads to the activation of a complex called the IKK complex. And that's the one responsible for phosphorylating IOB.
IOB, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Isn't that the inhibitor of NF-key? The one that keeps NF-key locked up in the cytoplasm?
Sharp memory. You're right. IB is like the bodyguard, keeps NF-key under wraps.
Okay.
So when IB gets phosphorylated by the IKK complex, it releases NF-key. And then NF-key, it's free to travel into the nucleus and turn on those pro-inflammatory genes.
It's like setting the alarm and then giving NF-key the key to unlock the defenses.
Perfect analogy. Now, the TRIF-dependent pathway, it's interesting. It uses a similar kind of kinase cascade, but has its own unique steps.
So if the MyD88 pathway is like that general alarm, is the TRIF pathway more like a targeted strike force?
I like that you could say that. Yeah. So TRIF, it recruits a different set of kinases, and eventually that leads to the activation of a protein called TBK1.
TBK1.
Yeah.
What's its role?
Well, TBK1, it's the key to activating interferons. It phosphorylates these proteins called IRFs, and they're the ones that travel to the nucleus and turn on those interferon genes, basically launching a counteroffensive against the virus.
So both pathways use these elaborate kinase cascades,
Right.
but ultimately they activate different transcription factors leading to different sets of immune molecules.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? The same basic signaling mechanisms, but achieving totally different outcomes, shows how flexible and adaptable our immune system is.
Now, you mentioned earlier there's some crosstalk between these pathways. What does that mean? Like, do they ever, I don't know, interfere with each other or work together?
It's more about collaboration, really. They can influence each other, create a more coordinated and robust response.
So like different branches of the military working together toward a common goal.
Exactly. For example, some TLRs can actually activate both pathways at the same time, so you get a double whammy.
Right.
Pro-inflammatory cytokines and interferons.
Makes sense. But we also talked about balance being so important,
Yeah.
how uncontrolled inflammation can actually be harmful. So what happens when things go wrong in these pathways? When the response is dysregulated?
That's when you start seeing problems like autoimmune diseases, chronic inflammation, even cancer. When these pathways are overactive, the immune system can attack the body's own tissues by mistake, or it might not eliminate threats effectively.
So those regulatory mechanisms we talked about earlier, the checks and balances,
Yes.
they're really crucial for preventing those kind of health issues.
Absolutely. Those negative feedback loops, the inhibitory proteins, they're essential to keep the immune response in check. Prevent it from going overboard and causing too much collateral damage.
So it's this constant balancing act. Make sure the immune system is strong enough to fight infection, but not so strong that it ends up harming the body itself.
Precisely. And scientists are always working to unravel the complexities of these pathways, hoping to find ways to manipulate them, for therapeutic purposes.
That's what makes this field so exciting. We're not just learning about the basics of the immune system, but gaining insights that could lead to new treatments for all kinds of diseases.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle. every new discovery brings us closer to understanding how we can harness the power of the immune system,
All right.
for good.
All right, welcome back. So we've gone from the very beginning, the detection of pathogens by TLRs, all the way to the activation of NF-key and those IRFs.
Right, and now we're going even deeper, down to the level of genes, see how these pathways really shape our immune response.
Okay, so those transcription factors, NFP and the IRFs, they make their way to the nucleus. What happens then? How do they actually turn on the genes we need to fight infection?
Well, think of it like finding the right switch to turn on the lights.
Okay.
These transcription factors, they bind to very specific regions of DNA
Right.
called promoters. And these promoters, they control the activity of genes that are nearby.
So they're like molecular keys, unlocking the genetic code for all those important immune proteins.
Exactly. And once they bind, those genes get turned on. And then you get this whole army of proteins produced, including the cytokines and interferons we talked about.
Wow, so it's this incredibly intricate cascade from detecting the pathogen to activating specific genes.
And it all happens so fast.
Yeah, incredibly efficient.
It's a testament to evolution, really.
Yeah.
Honing these defenses over millions of years. But, here's another interesting thing. Not all TLRs are actually on the cell surface.
Oh, really?
Some are inside the cell.
Inside the cell. But wouldn't they miss out on detecting those invading pathogens? How can they be effective if they're not, right there on the front lines?
That's a great question. These intracellular TLRs, they have a different job, but it's just as important. They're designed to detect pathogens that have already gotten inside the cell.
So it's like a second line of defense.
Yeah, like a backup system
To
catch those sneaky invaders that manage to slip through.
So like internal security guards.
Exactly. They recognize things like viral DNA or bacterial components that have escaped, from those little vesicles inside the cell.
And do these intracellular TLRs also use MyD88 and TRIF for signaling? Or are there other players involved?
Some do, but there are other adapter proteins too. It's a pretty complex system with multiple layers of redundancy.
Right.
So even if one pathway is blocked, the immune response can still be triggered.
Like having backup generators.
Exactly. You always got to have a backup plan. And this redundancy just shows how important these pathways really are.
Yeah, for our survival. Now, we've been talking about TLR signaling in terms of fighting infection, but I wonder, do they have other roles in the body?
That's a great question, and it's something researchers are really looking into. Turns out TLRs are involved in a lot more than just fighting pathogens.
Oh, wow. Like what?
Well, they play a role in tissue repair, for example.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and wound healing. And they also help with something called cancer immunosurveillance.
What's that?
It's basically the immune system's way of detecting and eliminating cancer cells.
So they're not just about fighting off invaders, but also maintaining the overall health of the body.
Exactly. It's all connected. And that makes TLRs even more interesting, as potential targets for therapies.
Makes sense. If we can figure out how to manipulate these pathways, we could potentially treat a wide range of conditions.
Absolutely. And there's some really exciting research happening right now. For instance, scientists are looking into using TLR agonists.
Agonists.
Yeah, those are molecules that activate TLRs. The idea is to boost the immune response against cancer.
Oh, so it's like giving the immune system an extra push to fight off those tumor cells.
Exactly. And then there are also clinical trials looking at TLR antagonists, which actually block TLR activation.
Oh, okay.
That could be helpful for treating autoimmune diseases.
So by understanding these pathways, we're not just gaining knowledge, we're developing tools to fine-tune the immune response.
And potentially treat so many different diseases. It's really a remarkable field. Shows the power of basic research, to lead to real-world applications that could really help people.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into TLR signaling pathways, I'm just amazed by how complex but also elegant these systems are. It's like we've uncovered this hidden world inside our bodies.
Yeah.
A world where all these molecular messengers and these intricate cascades are constantly working to keep us healthy.
And we've only just begun to understand it. There's so much more to learn, so many mysteries still out there. But every new discovery just brings us closer to understanding the amazing power of our immune system.
So the next time you feel a little sniffle coming on or you get a cut that heals, just take a moment to appreciate those TLR signaling pathways, silently working behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even when we're facing these invisible enemies, our bodies are prepared. We have these incredible defenses, always working to keep us safe.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new and maybe gained a little more appreciation for this incredible world that exists inside each of us.
And keep exploring, there's always more to discover.